Hi, everyone. It's Donna Marie, and welcome to the Best Life of Wellbeing podcast. Please subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell so that you know when new episodes are available. The podcast is designed to normalize death, grief, end of life, legacy, and whole life conversations that educate and inspire you to embrace your whole life by focusing on your end of life. Today's discussion is with Darthula Young. Have you ever experienced a squatter or known anyone to experience a squatter? Do you even know what a squatter is? Well, a squatter is someone who occupies a foreclosed, abandoned, or unoccupied property unlawfully and without the permission of an owner, and these people have rights. Listen to Darthula as she shares her experience and offers tips on what you can do to protect yourself against a squatter and what you can do if you happen to, God forbid, encounter a squatter. Today's intimate conversation is with Darthula Young. She's the owner of Rooted in Dignity Incorporated, a nonprofit company established in February 2023. Darthula earned her end-of-life coaching and end-of-life certification from the Conscious Dying Institute. Darthula started this Rooted in Dignity business because as family and friends turned to her with questions and concerns, she realized how little people knew about death and their reluctance to talk to their loved ones about transitioning. In addition, families aren't aware of the multitude of documents essential to end-of-life planning. So welcome, Darthula. Thank you for being here today.
It is my pleasure to finally catch up with you, Donna, and let's talk about things that are happening to us as we come to end of life and what's some of the things that are really important that folks need to be thinking about and doing as their loved ones come to end of life.
And I'm so grateful that we finally got to connect. It's been a little while, and you're a very busy woman. And so first, let's start off by you telling me some of what you do, the services you offer. And I know you've been traveling a bit, offering those services. So please provide more of an introduction and a little bit about what you do.
Well, I became an end-of-life doula, as you said, because as people began to transition, you really don't know what to do and what's going to happen. When I saw my mother, who was 93, shy of 1 month before her 94th birthday, when she passed on, that as I saw her declining physically and mentally, I just wanted to ensure that I knew exactly what was happening to her, as well as to myself, as I have become aging. So the first book I bought was Being Mortal, which really talked about what happens mentally and physically, especially physically, because it's written by a doctor. And in the medical profession, as we know, well, as my personal experience has been and what I've read is doctors have their own difficult time talking to people about end of life. And they're really not prepared to be upfront at end of life. Generally, it's the social worker, it's the nurse practitioner when you come to end of life that works with you. So as not only for my mother, but as family and friends started to decline and come to end of life, I decided that I was just going to become an end of life doula. So I had the tools and the skills to be able to walk that walk with them and know exactly what I was going to do. So that's where I began, and things just start evolving because the more I talk to people, I realize that we really, in our community, in Black, Indigenous, people of color communities, we do not get the same type of information. There's a lot of issues we have with the medical profession because we have, that goes back to slavery. And even today with medical experimentation, but also being able to talk to people and in plain English where people can understand and have that conversation of exactly what is happening to their loved ones as they start going through the different phases when you come to end of life. And another thing that became important, very important, was that we in our community are not prepared in terms of the documents that have to be prepared prior to somebody becoming incapacitated or end of life. A lot of times our property, we lose our assets because we have not prepared the type of documents that need to be prepared. Our property goes into probate, which can take a year or more just to resolve it. And then you have a judge who's making decisions on what happens and how your property is distributed to your beneficiaries. But as my mother went through her transition, I experienced a squatter that moved into my mother's apartment. When we talk about one of our modules, what to do after a loved one dies, one of the points that we always mention is to protect or secure the property. After someone dies and everybody leaves, and for me, it was always, and we have somebody in our family that's always like this, to protect the assets of the property in the house, because someone would always start saying, well, my mother said I could have this, or she said I should take this. So it has, with all of her belongings still in there, her personal property, her furniture, they broke in and set up household, changed the locks. So I didn't have access to the apartment. When I call the police generally do not intervene because, as they told me, squatting is a civil matter, not a criminal matter. Even though I could prove that I was the owner of the property, that yes, this was my mother's apartment and they were squatters. The guy who was the main squatter admitted that he was a squatter. The police could not do anything. They said I had to go through the court system and go to eviction court and have an eviction notice sent to them. So there is a long process that has to take place. It took me about a year. I had to hire an attorney. I had to, first of all, what you have to do is to give them a 5-day notice as if they are a tenant.
So wait a minute. So breaking and entering is not a criminal offense?
It is a criminal offense, but the police will not get involved when you talk about tenants or squatters. Now, personally, I felt like they should have gotten involved and made them move. One of the issues was that I didn't have access to the apartment because they changed the locks.
Right.
I didn't have keys. Even though they admitted and they didn't have any proof that they had the right to be in the property, the police would still not intervene. And generally, they won't intervene. Squatters do have rights. I did a lot of research, and there is no legislation, and it is generally at the state level, which governs tenants and squatters. There is no legislation in the state of Illinois that dictates squatters' rights, even though if you look at it, they do say that squatters have rights. But you have to go through the process as if they are tenants. But one of the things I also want to mention is what you need to do to protect your property.
Oh, thank you.
If you're going to be gone for an extended period of time, or if the property is going to be vacant, you need to board it up. You need to put up signs, and I didn't realize that signs, no trespassing signs, are very important to have on your property. You can have them say no trespassing, trespassers will be prosecuted. So you need that. You probably need to put on outside cameras just to record people coming and going. Motion detectors. So at night when the lights will come on, alarm system, turn off some of the utilities, the water if you can. So those are the things that you can do. If you get a squatter, and you could still get a squatter, you can contact the police and say, this property is going to be vacant for a while. I just want to let you know if you can watch it. Notify your trusted neighbors that your property is vacant. If they see any activity, to please let you know or call the police. Those are the things that I have discovered that you really need to do to secure your property. And not just if someone is to die. If the property is vacant, then you need to secure it. Once you have, and this can go for tenants too, because the same process is in place for tenants as well as squatters. If you get a squatter, the first thing you need to do, well, you can call the police and say, and fill out a police report that someone is on your property that is not authorized to be. In many instances, a squatter will have a bogus lease, which they have prepared themselves, and maybe rent receipts. You can get a lease from Office Depot or any of the stationery stores, and you can also get rent receipts. My squatter had none, and he admitted that he was a squatter and he knew his rights. The police indicated civil matter, nothing they can do, even though breaking and entering, and I thought was a criminal offense. First thing I had to do was to give them a 5-day notice. And when you give them a 5-day notice, it's the same type of notice that you would give a tenant who no longer pays their rent. Here to your demands, which could be pay me $10,000 and $5,000 a month for rent, something, it can be outrageous. After they haven't complied, then you can file an order with the clerk. In Illinois, it was the clerk of the circuit court, and you could do it online. I think most jurisdictions have an online process. So I filed the order with the clerk, as well as you have to pay the sheriff to come out and give the squatter or the tenant notice that there has been an eviction order filed against them. In my case, what I decided to do was to retain an attorney, because it can be a long process, legal process. And in the courts, an attorney will get better treatment than if you do it by yourself, which is pro se. You can go in and you can file the order yourself. You can represent yourself. I decided to get an attorney to represent us. So once it became, it came up within the courts, it first had to go to preliminary court to see a preliminary judge. The judge listened to my side, listened to their side. And I think we saw the preliminary judge at least 3 or 4 times, because they give you the opportunity then to try and negotiate and settle. And my position always was, there is no settlement. This person is illegally on my property. I want him out. Right. The squatter kept saying, well, I told her I would pay her rent. They just came up with their own story and said why they felt like they should be on the property. So finally, probably after 6 months, maybe 7 months, we got to the trial attorney. The trial attorney then heard the case, and what I wanted to do, heard what the squatter said, because of course he didn't have any legal representation. So we must have seen the trial attorney for at least 3 times before the trial attorney then said, okay, there is an eviction. Now, what was interesting about this was that the squatter showed up for court every time, and we happened to have a Zoom court. Because of the pandemic, the courts went to Zoom, and I don't know if eviction court has gone back to in person. So we went through that whole process, and the judge finally said that that person had an eviction and ordered them to be evicted. But you still have to then pay the sheriff's department to go out and bring that squatter off the property. They do not take their belongings off the property. They come in and they tell them, get out, you can't be on this property any longer. And they will put up a sticker that says that there is no trespassing on this property, that trespassers will be arrested. So that process probably took a year.
Wow. And then during that year, you shared with me that, you mentioned one of the important things to do if no one is in the home is to turn off the utilities. The squatter ran up a $1,300 water bill.
$3,500.
Oh my goodness.
Because, and what we found out when we had access, because initially he didn't have access to the basement, but he broke into the basement, and then he had access to the basement, and then locked us out of the basement. So he put on, every time I would change a lock, he would go behind us and change the lock again. So I had no access to the property at all. And I was filling out police reports, damage to personal property, everything he did. So it was I was at the police department filing charges against him.
Wow.
Yeah. So if you can, and I did have the other utilities were cut off, the gas and the lights, but they were able to have them turned on in somebody else's name. I'm not sure who.
Wow. So that is so interesting. When you shared the story with me, I was so amazed because I had no idea that squatters had so much power as it relates to their rights.
And I think every state has different, their jurisdiction is different because it's based on home rule. So it's based by state by state. But when you started doing the research and taking a look at this, because a lot of this happened during the pandemic when they had the moratorium on evictions, not only on the state level, but at the federal level. For about a year, there could be no evictions. And there were horror stories all over the country about people who were tenants who stopped paying rent and they couldn't be evicted. But also now you have squatters who could not be evicted.
Right. So do you think, because of your incident and other incidents, have you done anything to try and help change the laws that support squatters' rights?
I talked to one of the local state representative and asked him would he be interested, and he happens to be a real estate agent also, that would he be interested in taking a look at the laws and maybe introducing a state law indicating how squatters can be treated. You know, what kind of recourse do we have? Because I feel like I didn't have any recourse. People ask me all the time, well, do you know how much the financial damage was? And then I said, no, because I haven't added it up. But I look at if you have an apartment, they've been in there a year, the rent I'll say was $1,000, $3,500 water bill. They stole all the property that was in the house, which was a refrigerator, on my mother's crystal that she had forever, probably my grandmother's. So everything in the house that they could take, they took. And then what they couldn't take, they wound up destroying.
So tragic. And do I remember this correctly? They had dogs living in the property as well?
Right. Three pit bulls, three very vicious dogs. So there was no opportunity to really do anything because the dogs were always on the property or around the property. So, and then, you know, you have to remember also, if people say, well, why didn't you just take some guys and go in there and put them out? It's illegal. Right. And anything that would have happened, say, because they had guns, it was a drug house. They were selling drugs. They were doing all kinds of illegal things. So if something like that happens, then the responsibility would be on me. Plus, I was scared to go over there.
Yeah.
Think about it. Yeah, because there was a shooting. The way I found out they had moved in, there was a shooting on the property and the main squatter had gotten shot. And the neighbors called me to say there was a shooting on the property.
So I also remember you saying that the squatter never left the property. He was always there.
Was always there. The police did try and get him to come out, and I think they would have arrested him at some point because they did tell me that they knew he was a squatter, and they did gain access to the property. They went in, they looked around when he first moved in, and I showed them pictures. I said, you can see my mother sitting here in her living room on the furniture, and you've been in there, so you know. And I had to show them the deed. I had my attorney send a copy of the deed so that I could show them that I own the property.
I'm sorry you had to go through that. That is horrible. And it's such a long ordeal. And I'm glad it's to the end. Where are you now with the property? I know your mother owned a duplex in the South Side neighborhood of, is it Chatham?
Yes, she was in Chatham.
Owned it for over 30 years.
Right.
Yeah. And so how is the property now?
Well, I sold it, and that was really the only recourse I felt like I had because I didn't have the resources to do what needed to be done in order to bring it back up to where it needs to be. So, and I have siblings and we all own the property. So it was, you know, in our best interest to just go ahead and sell it and let somebody else worry about doing the rehab.
Were you able to salvage any of her personal belongings, or were everything destroyed?
Everything was just gone, yeah. And what wasn't, yeah, everything was gone. Because I was in the process of packing up her apartment too. We had moved her into an assisted living facility, and there was no hurry or no rush. I had taken some of her belongings out, but there was many crates that I had left in the property.
That do not trespass or no trespassing. How would
Yes.
that have helped? Just
It would have helped because that was the first thing. One of the first things the police were saying, well, did you have no trespassing signs up? And as I have been around, and I'm sure we all have been around, and we've seen signs on property that says no trespassing.
Yes.
But it is a deterrent, and the cops will really consider that. When I did put up the no trespassing signs, I took pictures of the property with the signs, and I put locks on the gates. I had tried to lock the property up. They would cut the locks on the gate, change the locks. So they did everything they could. They immediately would take down the no trespassing signs because there was traffic in and out of the building all the time. So we just had to wait until until we got the eviction from the judge. And then it took about 3 weeks before the sheriff came out and put everybody out. And at that point, they will not put their belongings out, and they cannot take their belongings out. It was just get out, and it was up to me whether they were getting their belongings or not.
Did you give them their belongings?
I told them, yeah, take your clothes and take what you can. But most of the stuff, it was just garbage.
Yeah.
They were sleeping. I don't know how many people were in there, but there were pallets all on the floor, mattresses. So there were a lot of people living there.
Wow. And they got to live rent-free and over a year.
Right.
Wow, that is horrible. And I again, I'm so sorry that you had to go through that and that you ended up having to sell your mother's property. Would you have kept it if this had not happened?
Probably would have handled it very differently.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, very differently, because we were in the position. It would have been easy. The building was in good shape. It would have been easy to just do little things around there, take our time and do. But as I said, you really have to be careful. You can go on vacation and come back and someone is in your property and you got a problem because you got a squatter in there and the police is not going to get involved. I'm hearing more and more now about Airbnbs, where people are renting Airbnbs and then refusing to leave and become squatters. And then they have to go through an eviction process.
You can go on vacation and come back from your vacation and not have a home to live in.
Yes.
Ooh, this is good information. I thank you so much for this warning and sharing the details of how to protect your property and making sure you have that relationship with your neighbors, that you inform police officers, you put up the no trespassing signs.
I see people who have, and they're at home and they're living there, but they still have no trespassing signs on their property.
Yes.
And I used to wonder, why do you have all these no trespassing signs? But I think that that's one important part of it. It seems like it's very insignificant, but it is a very important part of the process.
And making sure that you have the motion detectors and those cameras, those are very important. And those are easier these days and less expensive these days to add to your home. So that's very important as well. So
and an alarm system. There were things, I think we didn't have my mother's alarm system activated. She couldn't remember the alarm code, and we were going through all of this and it was broken. But, in retrospect, I look back now and said, I should have just had them come out, put in a new alarm system. But you never expect. I never would have thought that there would be squatters that had broken in and moved into her place.
I really appreciate you taking the time to come on and share this information with us. I think especially around the holidays, this is an important message because many people will be traveling. I definitely will make sure this message gets out as a warning to people.
One of the other things that I think we should be cautious about too is we put a lot of information on Facebook.
Right.
People are traveling, they're on vacation, they'll put pictures and they'll let people know I'm out of town. And there are people who are out here that are criminals, and they look at that. One of the first things they do is they will change the locks, so you don't have access.
Yeah. So good. Yes. Thank you again. That is unfathomable. I
Yes.
just cannot even imagine that happening. And one thing I can say, I'm grateful that it wasn't a home you were living in,
Yes.
that you had a home to go to each night, but I'm really sorry that it happened to your mother's property. They obviously knew that this was a vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
They took advantage of the opportunity to capitalize on this vulnerability.
Yes.
Your website again.
It's rootedindignity.com.
All right. And so in the services you offer are seminars and forums, as well as helping people to consider the paperwork that's needed.
Right.
And I am so glad the squatters thing is behind you, and you can add this information to your toolkit to help other people. This is really very important. I'm sorry that it happened to you, but you can certainly turn this into a very positive outcome as it relates to helping other people not have to experience what you've had to experience.
Thank you, Donna, for having me. And I'm glad to get this information out. I feel like I have become an expert on squatters now. So that's why we're putting out a podcast. The first to talk about how to protect your property, and the second issue will be what to do when you get a squatter.